introduce. Now, let me introduce the topic of the workshop. This is the last of 4 workshops in which we have been investigating the role of cultural and creative enterprises in urban revitalization process. In the previous workshop, we addressed the question if the cultural and creative operators are generators of innovation, activating virtuous processes of community building, and also why it is important to use the cultural and creative industries in this urban revitalization process. We involved best practices and the innovative action that given evidence to the strategic role of cultural and creative enterprises. Today, we want to complete this capacity building path by analyzing another point of view, highlighting and providing insight into current and future European Union support measures for the cultural and creative sector, as well as best practices to support the growth of cultural and creative enterprises. The spotlight on support measures for the cultural and creative operators become even more necessary considering the crisis triggered by the pandemic. It is evident that the ongoing pandemic had tremendous effects on the European cultural and creative sector, one of the most affected by the current crisis. The crisis has sharply exposed the structural fragility of the sector. So in the absence of responsive public support and recovery strategies, the crisis of the cultural and creative sector will have also a negative impact, not only in the sector, but also on city and regions in terms of jobs, revenues, level of innovation, citizen well-being, and the vibrancy and diversity of communities. In this context, we invited Alessandra Proto, head of the OECD Trento Center for Local Development based in Italy. Alessandra contributed to launch and develop the OECD work on cultural and local development. As you know, the OECD analyzed the sector and also the impact of pandemic crisis, addressing recommendation to the policymakers to ensure the introduction of policy and measures to support CCI in the short, but especially in the medium and long term. So, Alessandra, thank you. First of all, thank you for joining us and joining the workshop. I leave the floor to you to this overview on the cultural creative sector in our Europe. Thank you very much, Alessandra.
Thank you. Thank you, Cinzia, really very much. I'm very happy to be here with you today and to give you a presentation. Just allow me a second to share the screen. And I'm juggling between 2 different screens. So okay, this one. Okay, should be visible. Let me go in. Words in presentation mode. So can you just give me a signal that it's okay? Very good, because once it's there, I can't see you anymore. Very good. So as I said, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be in this workshop and to have also an exchange with all of you, because the topic is really important and the moment is very important as well. So for the OECD, culture is a relatively new field of work. So we started, thanks to Italy, indeed, to work on the topic of culture some 7, 8 years ago, because, you know, the OECD deals with a broad range of topics in the economic field, but culture was always related to activity of of UNESCO, because there is already an organization, international organization, which is working on culture and creativity. But what we do was trying to really look at the sector from the economic perspective and the economic side. Indeed, myself, I'm not an expert, unfortunately, on culture nor creativity, but I am an expert on local development. And when it goes to a locality and a place, the creativity of a place, the knowledge that is in the place, the cultural heritage that is present in a place are contributing very much to the development, to the local development of such a city or a region. So what we do at the OECD, we are supporting governments, first of all, to try to mainstream culture beyond cultural policies and as an integral part of the wider policies agendas, such as, for instance, employment, social cohesion, innovation, and sustainable local development, and so on. So not just culture per se, or cultural creativity per se, but as a wider agenda. And also help governments to adapt those different policies to the needs of the sector, because we will see later on in the presentation that the sector has specific needs that should be taken in consideration. And to do so, as the role of the sector needs to be really thoroughly understood, we also help to build and improve international comparable statistics on the scale, the scope, and the impact of CCI, so that governments at all levels can also, define their policies on a real and granular evidence. And then we also help them to build the capacity of national and local governments to integrate culture into a broader economic and social development strategies. So we've been working recently with the EC, the European Commission, on these topics, and we will soon publish a report which will focus on these 4 areas that you will see here on the right side of the screen, which is cultural participation, jobs, firms, funding, and investment. And I'm gonna touch upon those topics in my presentation. This is our work as OECD, as I said, data and analysis. We do also some case study reviews. So it means we go in places, we analyze, we support the development of specific policies. In this case, we've been working with, in Italy, Regione Emilia-Romagna, Glasgow City Region, Flanders, and so on. We organize capacity buildings, and we do any sort of webinars and seminars. So the sector, what are we talking about? Because indeed, the sector is so broad and diverse that it's very difficult to draw the borders. And CCIs are very diverse, and they include non-for-profit and for-profit organizations with diverse business models, cost structures, and financing needs. That, of course, it's very difficult to have like one policy fits all. So if we look at the entrepreneurship side of the sector, we see that, well, is as good as the others. So 7% of all enterprise, it represents 7% of all enterprises. In some places like the Netherlands, even the 14.5, has higher birth rates, so 10.6 versus 10.2 in the general business sector, very similar survival rates, and it helps to drive innovation across the economy. But as I said, is different. And what are these differences? It's smaller. The percentage of the micro firms in the cultural and creative sector is higher compared to the share of micro in total business economy. And the percentage of large firms, which represents 0.1, is smaller than the percentage in the traditional economy. So it's a smaller, it's characterized by very small companies, and it's project-based. You know that we know all that businesses in the sector commonly revolve around project-based work. For example, I don't know, the development of a new film or a book or an exhibition. And this type of works requires different skills at different times, meaning that culture and creative businesses often work collaboratively with freelancers and other business in temporary arrangements. And this very fluid labor dynamics and project-based working promote the creation also of very strong networks of creative entrepreneurship, where personal and professional relationships are of great importance. And actually, I really subscribe this issue, because this is also, I'm here also with friends and not only with the colleagues in this webinar. And it's also based on intangible assets, which makes particularly the funding issue quite critical. And as I said, very diverse, including profit and non-profit and different issues. And this calls for a need of tailored policies. So we know that it drives innovation across the economy. Culture and creative sector produce a multitude of new products and services, and they also are important suppliers of ideas and new approaches also for other activities. So it's not only what they do itself as a company, so with new products, but they also subsidize and non-for-profit for commercial firms, but they also are very important in the so-called cross-innovation with other sectors. And this is something that we also would like really to look in. Here, for instance, you can see on the right side of the screen some selected innovation indicators that were developed by the UK, where shows that in terms of product innovation, CCIs contribute with a higher range than the rest of the economy. Also to new to the market innovation, process innovation, organization innovation, and ongoing innovation activities. So just to say that this is a very, as we are all looking for innovation as a very important driver of productivity and development of our places, this is something where the sector can contribute importantly. But then here comes the headache, which is the funding sources. And we know we will have also some interesting examples later on. As you see here, this complex slide, we have an overview of different sources of finance. Because what we learn is that CCIs increasingly rely on mixed funding, and they also combine several different objectives. So starting from self-finance, the so-called family, friends, and fools who are investing in our idea, in our business, but also public support measures, grants, tax incentives, voucher schemes. And here we have interesting cases, for instance, from Colombia, which introduced a zero income tax for 7 years for startups in the culture and creative industry sector, along with a range of other tax incentives to encourage domestic investment in the country, which was really very successful. Or the case of the art bonus in Italy, a taxation policy that supports culture and creative sectors through tax relief on charitable giving to arts and heritage organization. And just to give a number, what we know is that it exceeded 500 million euros in donation since its introduction in 2014. And this is a scheme that is very well recognized internationally. Or the Bologna Creativity Voucher, which is a scheme offered to SMEs in any industrial sector. They just gave a small voucher to develop a creative innovation in collaboration with the company in the creative industry. And so to create this connection between traditional economy or companies and the creative people. What else? Yeah, the Japan hometown tax. And here in this case, in Japan, they have a citizen, they see reduce their resident tax if they donate a part of it to another municipal project, including a cultural one. Or the French Pass Culture. The voucher schemes are also very useful to facilitate access to culture for different population groups. And in this case, it works for youngsters, and the Pass Culture increase the participation of young people in cultural activities. We also know that a large amount of money comes from debt finance, which is a traditional financing for SMEs, and it's difficult for the cultural and creative sector to access. And here, for instance, Creative England developed an interesting investment program where they provide startup loans and expansion capital specifically for cultural and creative industries. When we go to equity finance, there is a very interesting and successful example in Korea, the so-called Motai Fund, where in 2005, the Korean government launched a large-scale state-owned venture capital investment fund known as the Motai Fund. I don't know if I pronounce it well, but it means mother fund in Korean. And it focuses on supporting SMEs and startups in a number of specific sectors, including culture. And this is the reason why also there was this exceptional growth rate of Korean creative sector in the past 20 years. And then we have other means of finance like philanthropy, sponsorship, patronage, and so on. But what is interesting and important here is just the role of the government in terms of orchestrating all this and not only giving subsidies or tax relief, but trying to channeling all the different sources of financement. Here we can see that government spending on cultural services has been decreasing, unfortunately, and it represents a tiny number, which is 1.2% of the total spending across the OECD, which is definitely not a great percentage. But what is interesting is that the shares of subnational government spending is much higher than the national one, and that 60% of total public expenditure towards cultural services is done by subnational governments. And this is just to say how important are cities, regions in this field. So if we now look at, as I said, employment, the headache comes when we have to, say what is the cultural employment? Where do I draw the statistics from? And here we just took a very pragmatic approach where we were looking at economic activity. So for the technical people, the NACE side, and occupations. And we put this together. So we have cultural occupations in cultural sectors. We have non-cultural occupations in cultural sectors, but we also have cultural occupations in non-cultural activities. And this brings our cultural employment. But here, the difficult to measure is very high because it is really difficult to capture creative jobs in non-creative sectors, and particularly the secondary jobs and the volunteer work that is not visible. So national statistics tend really to underestimate cultural employment. But why is this so important for us? Basically, cultural employment accounts for up to 1 in 20 jobs in some countries and up to 1 in 10 jobs in some regions and cities. And here, it's very small, but you see how wide is the the difference in a single country in terms of regional differences. So in some countries, the percentage varies, and we see that cultural jobs tend to concentrate in cities and in capital regions. And we also know that cultural professionals can be found in almost all sectors, helping to drive innovation across the economy. And an average about 40% of cultural employment can be found outside the cultural and creative sector. And the employment growth in this sector outpaced other sectors before the crisis. It means that the employment in the sector was growing by 13.4% between 2011 and 2019, compared to 9.1% of overall employment across OECD and EU countries. So it was really growing faster before the crisis, because this has stopped. And what we can see is that cultural employees are more likely to be in non-standard forms of employment and hold multiple jobs. So that means that a huge percentage, like almost 30% of cultural employees, are self-employed. Much of these are due to project-based nature of the work. They work on part-time jobs. Therefore, their access to social protection is a big challenge for them. And there are also there are important divides within and across the sector, because as we said, it's such a different sector that it cannot be like considered just as an average. But what we also know is that they are very highly skilled and less at risk of automation. So the sector can be considered to be more future-proof vis-a-vis the risk of automation. Cultural employment is also marked by really a skills paradox, because although cultural employees are really more highly educated than the average, there are also significant skill gaps that hold the sector back, such as, for instance, the one related to entrepreneurship skills. And here, due to the highly skilled and non-repetitive nature of these types of jobs, they also unlikely to be automated, but will be transformed by digitalization in other ways. So the learning process and the continuous learning is very, very important. So what are we suggesting, and what are the policy perspectives that should be taken in consideration? So first of all, addressing the gaps in the social protection coverage and leverage other tools to improve job quality in the sector, because it's not only about the quantity of jobs, but very much also about the quality of jobs and how this can contribute to development. And try to close the skills gaps, particularly related to entrepreneurial skills and for specific subsectors. And here strategies include enhancing access to entrepreneurial training, coaching, mentoring, and a number of activities like this type of seminars that you are also organizing. And support the sector's digital transition. This is something very important, because the sector cannot afford to step back in this field. And if we think, we have like video games developers that are super high tech, but then if you look at museums, for instance, there are a very diverse situation across them. And also try to maximize the full potential of the synergies between the cultural and creative sectors and other sectors, such as, for instance, in the field of education and health. So trying to maximize what is also defined as a social impact, because the importance of the sector is not only economic, and I really want to stress this, but it's also in terms of the social impact that it can have. So I just close with an advertisement that many of you may have received. This is just a save the date of our Summer Academy on Culture and Creative Industries. This will be the 5th edition. We will definitely work on the transformative impacts of culture and creativity for better societies. And I really hope to see you joining our work there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, for this, this overview, this data, and above all, to have focused your presentation on the jobs, quality of jobs, and these skill gaps that, of course, we test every day in our activity. And thank you also for this solicitation for the policymaker to define policy and measures to support the cultural and creative industry. As you say, it is strategic to introduce measures to help the micro farms, also to support them to adapt to this structural change that we live every day. Also, of course, it is important to invest for the digital infrastructure and digital challenge, and also, of course, promote the complementarities between culture and other sector, economic sector. But while policymakers need to address this concern, at the same time, it is crucial that cultural creative industries strengthen their skill and their ability to seize opportunities. Culture, it is an important pillar for the European Union. In fact, we know that a wide range of European funding instruments is open for cultural and creative projects. So today we want to provide a first glance on the new generation of European Union funding programs that are accessible for the cultural and creative sector. So we have invited Gabriele Rosana, Policy Director of Cultural Action Europe, to give us an overview of the opportunities for the cultural sector for the next year. Thank you very much, Gabriele. I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, grazie Cinzia, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. And it's very inspiring to speak after the presentation we just heard, because I probably will change very much the order of what I wanted to present, but it's very interesting to see that the pillars of activity of what we do at Culture Action Europe, what we monitor also from Brussels, is extremely, I would say, aligned with what has just been presented, from the funding headache to the working conditions of artists and cultural workers, which I must say in the last 2 years has really become the main, probably the major strength of activities that we are pursuing at European level. Although, I mean, that was a topic that has always been very much present in our mission, and I will tell you more about that in a second. But of course, due to the COVID pandemic, we are seeing that the European institutions are very much now reacting upon that. And I will say a few words about that later on. Let me launch, so just 2 seconds. I will open up the presentation. Sorry, but
don't worry, Gabriele. It is the new challenge to share presentation on Zoom.
Well, after 2 years, it's really
okay. Let's go.
Should be done with blind eyes. So as Cinzia was saying, indeed, I'm connected from Brussels, where Culture Action Europe is based. It's the major cross-sectorial cultural network in Europe. We gather almost 180 members. Our members themselves, they are European cultural networks of specific cultural practices or artistic domains, but also national organizations, also public authorities, policymakers, academics, but also individual members and artists, activists themselves. So we really try to picture the wide variety of and mirror the wide variety of cultural actors in Europe. Our main activity is advocacy on, and I mean, analysis on the one hand, of course, not at the, of course, I mean, it's not an analysis at the level of the OECD, it's an analysis to feed our advocacy actions, our main advocacy actions. And that's what we normally do vis-a-vis the EU institutions. So our main interlocutors are indeed the European Commission, the European Parliament, the Council of the European Union. Yeah, this is what I was saying. Indeed, we believe in the value and values of culture. It was interesting to hear before, indeed, not just to highlight the economic value of culture in Europe. We are actually also exchanging with the interlocutors I was referring to before. We normally hear that it's important, the GDP contribution, the contribution of culture to Europe GDP, so it's more than 4%, or how many people are employed in the culture and creative sectors and industries in Europe, ranging between 8 to 12 million, depending on indeed the indicators that you use. All that is crucially important. What is also crucially important is to recognize the value of culture, the intrinsic value of culture, the value of culture per se, and at the same time, of course, the contribution it gives to more cohesive society, and also societies that are more aware of the many challenges that we've had, starting with the climate urgency to the democratic challenges, especially that we are seeing in times when a war of aggression is back in the continent. I wanted to start, before going into details of the various things that are happening in the EU bubble, with presenting what we have already more than 2 years ago launched as an umbrella initiative. So, I mean, we are coming from the civil society sector, and we are very used to launch campaigns and to have the policymakers as main interlocutors. So with the European Cultural Foundation, which, I mean, from the philanthropic word, is the main interlocutor when it comes to culture in Europe, and the Europa Nostra dealing, so especially with heritage, we have launched the Cultural Deal for Europe as an umbrella strategy of the many things that taking, if one could even, taking advantage of the pandemic, those actions we should undertake to better the conditions of culture in Europe, or even put culture at the center of the EU policy making. I will mostly speak about the first bullet points that you see there on the left, so that the voting at least 2% of the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility for Culture, because I think that's also something, some food for thought that is useful as a takeaway for the participants in this workshop to reflect upon later on. One of the main strengths of our campaign was indeed asking that each and every member state in the European Union, each and every of the 27 earmarked a specific, not that much, it's 2% of, but a specific funding line of their recovery and resilience plans. So the Recovery and Resilience Facility is the main bulk. It's more than 80% of the Next Generation EU program. So the loans and grants that the European Union has put forward for fueling the recovery from the pandemic, earmarking 2% of each and every plan that has been developed to sustain the culture and creative sectors. There was an interesting study published already 1 year ago. It was January 2021, commissioned to Ernst & Young by JSAC, by the Authors Societies, that was showing that indeed culture was the most, if not the most, but the second most affected sector by the pandemic, with a turnover down of 31% up to 90% in the live performance sectors. We then called on the member states, because that's on their responsibility, to prioritize culture in their recovery strategies. This has been something that not only we have done from Brussels, let's say, also with a wide coalition of more than 110 other networks and organizations, all European in scope, but also the national actors have, depending on the country, depending on the sensitivity, but have also further developed. As of today, what we have been doing at the end of 2021 was taking all the plans that have been presented so far. Those are 26 out of 27, only the Netherlands is still missing. And we have really seen what is in paper there, or how this pledge was responded by the government of the member states. 14 out of 26 have included some interventions relevant for culture. Let's forget the meeting the 2% earmarking in each and every member state. That is a value that has only been met at an aggregated level, and only if we consider both EU money and national co-funding. But in this mapping, in this overview that we have developed, and you find it on our website, cultureactioneurope.org, we have tried to list all types of interventions that indeed have been included under the chapter culture, but those that have a chapter culture in the various recovery plans. And this is relevant very much because, before it was mentioned also the role of culture in urban revitalization processes. And of course, some countries, and Italy is one of those, have also flagged this in their recovery strategies. In Italy, it's the work about the recuperation also of the borghi, translation in English I'm not familiar with, so the small cities and villages, often in non-urban contexts. That is an example indeed of types of activities that have been included there. And I very much encourage those of you indeed who see that their country has put somehow culture in their recovery plan to go there and see what type of interventions. A main concern, also echoing what was said before about small and micro players, small and micro organizations, cultural organizations that really represent the backbone of Europe's cultural sector, Europe's diversity. A comment that we got also from our members all over Europe was that type of intervention was missing. So these plans really, probably it's also the structure of a very much infrastructure plan, I'm not hiding that, but these plans have been very much targeting major players. You name them, big museums, big major cultural venues in several member states. You see France has a huge list of indeed cultural organizations that are benefiting from this plan, but that leaves then the daily actors of the European culture and creative scene not covered by the major spending program that is rescuing the continent after the pandemic. Then there comes our advocacy plea to the European institutions that is taken into account then in all also complementary funding schemes, those that should deal with the business as usual, if we can still speak of business as usual. One thing that well, these are things that I've been already saying, but one thing that then the European institution have done, well, the European Commission has done towards the end of 2021, was a couple of 3 months ago, was launching a platform that I invite you to have a look at. That is the Culture EU funding tool. So it's a, if my screen is still shared, I think I had it open. Yes, it's not the page itself, but yeah, it's a interactive tool on EU funding. I mean, there was no, I see I'm not sharing it. Apologies. It is an interactive funding tool. I mean, we were involved in the beta version of it, so we were trying a bit to put ourselves in the shoes of cultural practitioners that are indeed looking for, that have an idea in mind and are looking for sources, public sources to finance or co-finance it. If you indeed visit the Culture EU funding tool, you can put who you are, where you are from, and what idea you have in mind, and you will see what indeed opportunities are available for you. It is, for now, there are 75 funding opportunities from 21 different EU programs. It's very customary for us to think of funding culture in Europe through Creative Europe. Well, today's workshop with an Interreg fund and the ERDF money proves that indeed culture can be funded also beyond the dedicated funding scheme to culture that is Creative Europe, that has been doubled in size for the next 7 years. Of course, Creative Europe still stays as the main bulk of activities for cultural cooperation in Europe. Actually, I want to share the information that the cooperation calls that were supposed to, whose deadline was supposed to expire on the 31st of March, has been extended. So the deadline has been extended to the 5th of May, and taking into account, of course, that also Ukraine is a country member of Creative Europe, and that gives also time to reconsider some of, I mean, at least that's in the intention of the Commission. What we have been told gives the opportunity to also include Ukrainian cultural agents in those projects. I'm saying, indeed, Creative Europe is the main bulk. It's not the only one. Horizon Europe, for the first time in the new programming cycle, has included a dedicated envelope for culture, which is the cluster 2 of Horizon Europe, whose calls are indeed also already open and will, I mean, first round will also expire soon, but you have other programs like InvestEU or indeed the European Regional and Development Fund that can contribute to culture. All that somehow mirrors and reflects and answers to what we as representative of the culture and creative sectors in Brussels have been advocating for years, if not more than a decade. That was precisely what also was said before by the OECD, so mainstreaming culture beyond cultural policies, but pooling resources from beyond the cultural, the pure cultural envelope. In this cross-sectorial exercise, also contamination exercise, the Commission has presented in as launched in 2020 and then further detailed in 2021, the new European Bauhaus initiative. That is also another source could be another source of interest for your activities. The new European Bauhaus is let's call it the cultural declination of the Green Deal. So, I mean, the role of culture also in advancing the climate urgency and in indeed acting as the fourth pillar of sustainable development, making more sustainable not only cultural practices, but in general, raising awareness about sustainability. The new European Bauhaus, currently the selection for the prizes is open for 2022. The deadline is actually coming. It's actually coming up, and prizes are for up to 30,000 euros for up to 30,000 euros for the projects that have already been developed, that are relevant indeed to show not only the link between culture and sustainability, but also how we reimagine spaces where we live, also post-pandemic, not only the built environment, but also public spaces. One more thing indeed that the new European Bauhaus can do, just speaking of that, because tomorrow we will be publishing our contribution to the reflection process of the new European Bauhaus, is indeed highlighting also the necessity to enhance the link between culture and artistic, between research, innovation, science, technology, and culture. So indeed recognizing that link and enhancing also funding opportunities. Of course, I'm acknowledging here, we have seen a very detailed funding mix before presented by Alessandra. Very much of what I'm talking about, well, basically everything I've been saying until now is speaking of public funding. We acknowledge that given the enormous impact that the pandemic has had on the cultural sectors, indeed, there is the need for the public decision makers to step up to the challenge and increase funding available for culture, especially to those initiatives that otherwise would not have a possibility to access to sustainable funding. And when I speak of sustainable funding, of course, that pretty much highlights something I was speaking about already at the beginning of my presentation, which is the topic of the working conditions of artists and cultural workers, that has known a new life in the EU policy circles, in the EU debate following the pandemic. We as Culture Action Europe have developed for the European Parliament a research indeed on a European framework for the working conditions of artists, on the minimum standards that a European framework for working conditions of artists should have in order to make the cultural employment more sustainable. We've heard before that indeed the cultural employment includes non-standard form of employment. We've seen that during the pandemic, many cultural actors have left the sectors altogether, reverting to other types of jobs. And we have also identified those reasons why, I mean, they were said already before, why the cultural employment is not as sustainable as it should and could be. So we advocate for not only project-based employment that per se represents one of the key challenges of and one of the key features also of the fragility of the cultural employment, as well as fair remuneration and missing links also between art education and the cultural cultural education and the cultural employment. So these are all policy recommendations that we have. Well, these are some of the policy recommendations that we have put forward for the EU decision makers to act upon. The European Parliament has overwhelmingly backed resolution. Of course, it's a non-binding tool, but it's advancing the topic very much at the level of the EU debate on working conditions. It is very much it is calling for a European status of the artist, so bundling together both binding and non-binding tools, from social security to access to funding. And that's, I mean, now the European Commission and especially the Council of the EU need to react upon. Tomorrow here in Brussels, we have a conference that has its main panel dedicated to the topic. And 2 years ago, when, I mean, we first were developing our research on this topic, I mean, it was a topic for behind the doors talks, but it was not a topic for measure political commitment of the European Union. So we really see that time is right for a political action in that respect. And this conference is actually happening, and I concluded that in the framework of the Creative Flip project, which is a project of the European Commission, and probably I will manage now to share this screen. Yes, which is a project of the European Commission developed by the Goethe Institute. And the Creative Unite project already during the pandemic has gathered relevant opportunities in response to the COVID crisis on its website. So indeed, it's a platform where you can search by your sector and area of interest, or you can upload opportunities, calls, or also a research for partnerships that you can upload there, and indeed browse through what is then relevant for you to know, to Europeanize also your activity. As of this morning, indeed, I'm very happy of that. We were in contact with the team at Creatives Unite, who have proposed opening a dedicated page of opportunities for the Ukrainian artists that are coming to Europe. So relevant opportunities also for Ukrainian artists, or where an Ukrainian artist can find relevant opportunities for them, or where an organization can upload what they are offering, what they are doing for Ukrainian artists. We thought indeed that this platform that already proved during the pandemic being a good pooling resource, a good pooling tool for gathering relevant information for artists and creatives could be also employed in the new crisis that we are facing. I very much advise then to have a look both at the Culture EU funding guide that I was mentioning at the beginning of my presentation, because you will have the opportunity to browse through several funding opportunities that are relevant for you, depending on indeed the type of sector you are in. All sectors is what we wanted for cross-sectorial cultural projects. But at the same time, also browsing through the Creatives Unite platform for updates regarding indeed initiatives that are relevant for culture and creative sectors and industries, also in the wake of the COVID pandemic. You know, of course, that was not on my menu, but I conclude with that also in the last 2 years, the European Commission has had a temporary framework of for state aid in response to the COVID pandemic. Those measures are not per se European Union measures, but there are several that are also relevant for culture and creative sectors, because I mean, it is about giving the member states the possibility to adopt at national level some state aid that are relevant for the sector, that from aviation to indeed culture. and tourism that have been most affected by the pandemic. So, I mean, the European response is not, does not end with the European funding schemes, but also from a regulatory point of view, enabling the national government to put forward also national schemes that are best also because they are at national, local, regional level best positioned to answer to the challenges that are felt by the cultural operators. I think that my time is over, and I tried to bundle together very different types of information, from concrete calls for application to indeed the political work that is ongoing here in Brussels and that we are following on a daily basis, plus a few indeed inputs, reading inputs that I hope will be useful for the participants.
Thank you very much, Gabriele, for the presentation that show that there is a wide range of opportunity and measure to support the sector, but also not only measure, but vision and policies. Thank you to share with us the information about the Cultural European Funding Tool, the platform. I think that it is a very useful tool for the cultural and creative industries that but on the other hand, it is important that the cultural creative industry strengthen their skills and competences to catch the opportunities and face the new challenges, because the measures are complex, the programs are complex, so they need skills to approach to the measure, to the program, to the goals, and so on. So thank you very much, Gabriele. Of course, I remember to the participants that if you want to address a question, please write it on chat. It is not only Europe, of course. We have Gabriele, but also Alessandra highlighted that there are the national governments that address, measure, and support cultural and creative industries. This is why we invited Christina Koch, responsible at EWS, the promotional bank of the Austrian federal government. And she's responsible for the European Union project for the EWS in the areas of creative industries, entrepreneurship, and digitalization. We have asked to Christina to present the Creative Industries Voucher, a supporting measure considered as a best practice by the policy monitoring platform of UNESCO. So please, Christina, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, do you say Cinzia? How do you pronounce it in Italian?
Cinzia.
Cinzia, interesting. Yes. Okay, Cinzia. Okay, I will mispronounce it again in the future. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, as she already mentioned, I work for the company called Austria Wirtschaftsservice, which is doesn't have an English translation, unfortunately. It's the Promotional National Bank of Austria. We're owned by the Ministry of Digital and Economic Affairs and the Ministry of Innovation. And today I'm here to talk just a little bit about the creative industries in Austria and what we did in the past years to support them. So we did some concrete measures that were also mentioned before by Alessandra, some as examples, for example, as the vouchers. So first of all, we have a strategic framework where there's the creative industry strategy for Austria that has been developed already in 2016 with several different levels and different measures, things that we should do in Austria. And we also have monetary support to implement those measures. So that we have already longer, since 2004, a lot of money has gone to the creative industries. And I'm today going to show you, in my organization, we have different funding programs, and my department where I'm located at is responsible for creative industries. There we had in the past already, as you can see here, funding programs that support companies with creative ideas or creative companies with creative ideas. We funded them on a big scale, but they had to be very highly innovative, and the budget, the funding was up to 200,000 euro. And what we saw is that there is some kind of gap. We did some research, and we saw that companies from the wider economy the problem is not so much, there is one problem, you should support creative industries themselves. But one of the bigger problems for our economy that we saw is that that companies from the wider economy don't really cooperate with creative service providers, and that this would be something that is economically very important and that could support Austria as the economy as a whole. So we saw that, okay, there is some kind of need. How can we make companies aware of the benefits when working with a creative service provider? And we came up with the idea of the voucher because it's very easy easy to get. It was very, the application form was very, not very administrative, very fast. You could get the 5,000 euro quite easily. So that was the plan. Generally, for you to know, for us, the voucher was a grant for the wider economy to cooperate with the creative service provider, worth up to 5,000 euro, and the funding was up to 100%. So we did not ask for any co-financing in our case. The goal was to stimulate intersectorial cooperation amongst many companies. So we wanted to have this kind of funding, many vouchers go out all over Austria, and so that they would create a lot of projects, so that a lot of companies would, in a small scale, see the benefits when working with creative industries. And the simulation worked. It was very successful in the beginning. We were a bit shocked by how many people applied for this voucher, how much there was a need for this kind of voucher, and a very big interest from companies. To give you some numbers, in Austria, we have used 1.5 to 3 million euro per year for those vouchers. So it depended. Sometimes it was half of the budget, sometimes it was double of the budget. In the years 2013 until 2018, we've received more than 10,000 project applications, which was very difficult for us at times. In the end, we spent more than 10 million euro on the vouchers, and more than 2,000 projects have been supported with the amount of about 5,000 euro. One specification that we had with the company from the wider economy had to be Austrian, but the creative service provider could be from anywhere in the world. So this was before pandemic, so most of the people preferred to work, most of the companies preferred to work with Austrian creative service providers, so 97 of them. But still, we wanted to keep it open in order to also possibly have some kind of internationalization elements in this voucher. And the scheme was quite successful. We've also been directly copied by 2 EU regions that they copied it within an EU project that I was the coordinator of. It's called the Regional Creative Industries Alliance, and it was an Interreg Europe program, a project that ended just in January, so very recently. To give you one example of a good practice example, Schwingenschlögel is a tank semi-trailer company in Austria. It's existing for many generations already. And I like this story, personally I like this one very much because it also contains some of the prejudices that people have. There is the senior managing director and the junior managing director. And the junior managing director had said in the past already that he wanted to hire a designer to cooperate with him on maybe possible changes on the tank semi-trailer. And the senior was always against it because he said it's wasted money for nothing. They will just paint flowers on the tank semi-trailer and we want to have money for it. So, but in the end, they applied for the voucher because it was for free, so they could test it, and the junior could convince also the senior on the benefits when working with creative service providers. And they have not only done a nicer design on it, they've also changed some elements so that it reduces the air. Not my English is going worse because I haven't traveled much in the last 2 years. So they reduce the air contrast. So now they also need less gas to drive. So it's economically also makes sense for that. So yeah, that was one of my favorite projects examples and success stories from the voucher. So what worked? We did some kind of evaluation after that, and 75% of the SMEs said that they saw a rise of quality in their projects due to the cooperation with the creative service provider. 75% will continue also without the voucher. This was very important for us because we wanted this to be a first initial support, but then after, you cannot fund every cooperation with everybody all the time. It should be just the first initial input for them to test. And apparently most of them also continued cooperating with the same or other creative service providers. And also 100% said that they would apply again for the creative voucher. So for us, it was a great stimulus for new cooperations. The challenge was definitely to handle the great amount of applications. So it was more than 2,000 every year. We had different schemes. I'm not going to explain it right now. Well, I'll just say that at first we thought we're going to do first come, first serve, but our servers broke down because there were so many people applying at the same time. So we had to change that, and we made it open for 1 month. And then we went to an external notary who made a random order and then looked at the first 300 vouchers per year or 600 vouchers per year that were good enough to meet what we were asking for the voucher. It's not with such a big amount of vouchers, you cannot do a jury session anymore. This is not possible to have a jury members look at 2,000 applications and then make the best 600. It's not. Usually those kind of vouchers were not for the most innovative projects. It was innovative for the company. So yeah, we have other programs that support the very innovative ideas. So why should you have a creative voucher? For us, it was good because the creative industries are really an important driver of innovation, as has been already mentioned in the presentations before. Creative services can be of great value for innovations in other industries. This is something that we really want to force on in Austria, to stimulate and enable cooperation between creatives and companies from the wider economy. And yeah, just as a general boosting innovation through the power of creative industries. So use their transformative powers for for the wider economy as well. So in our point of view, creative vouchers are rather non-bureaucratic and flexible instrument to address particular problems with low administration costs, but strong spillover effects. This is what we have experienced in Austria. This is all from my side for now. Thank you for having me here and letting me speak. But of course, if you have any questions, you can ask now or also send me an email.
Thank you very much, Christina. It is a very sweet measures for encouraging micro and small and medium enterprises to use services of creative industries, so supporting, as you said before, innovation within the creative industry and stimulating this cross-sectorial cooperation. So I think that we need to spread this type of measures, this type of tools to support the growth of the sector and to support the growth of this cooperation among different economic sector. So now it is time for question and answers. So if you have a question, please you can write it on you can write it on chat, and then we will read your question. I have two questions, one for Alessandra and one for Christina. So Alessandra, this is for you. We have listened to what are the policy perspective to be adopted in general for the development of this sector. As you know, our goal in this project, but also in general, our goal is to spread to the peripheric area of the nation in order to revitalize them. So from your point of view, from your analysis, are there any preconditions for this to happen? I don't know if was
thank you, Cinzia. Well, the issue of peripheral areas, in Italy we call them aree interne, so areas that are not at the not urban urban centers, is actually very important for the sake of global development of a country, because we cannot have, normally these areas are also lagging behind in terms of development, so less services, decreasing population, aging population, and so on. So this is actually an issue that should be taken very seriously, and has been also taken very seriously by the Italian government, but also in many other countries there is the very same situation. And we saw also in the slide that I showed before that indeed the concentration of culture and creative jobs are more likely to be in urban areas or in regions, in capital regions. And so why? I would say that now the pandemic gave a strong push towards this issue of remote work that I think will not disappear soon. I hope so, because I think it was actually a great improvement in many cases. Not a panacea, of course, but the possibility of working from different places, therefore also attracting for long or short period of time talents in places is something important. And what we are seeing now is indeed a real competition of places in attracting talents like digital nomads, and we know that in the cultural and creative sector there are a lot of these occupations that are not really so bound to a place itself. So there is we are really looking, you know, from Tulsa, from South working in Italy. I mean, there are many experiences where we see, you know, regions trying to attract talents. Or by offering better living conditions. On the other side, service is extremely important. I mean, we were talking about, you know, innovation, but also the infrastructure in terms of internet accessibility. This is extremely important. So we are keeping monitoring, you know, the network, how it works, whether it's not only if it's there, but also what is the quality again of this network. So the speed and so on. And I think that this is something that will really try to keep, is an element that is important to keep connected, let's say the peripheral areas with the more developed one. But for the cultural and creative sector, what we are seeing is also this balance between, you know, standards, I mean, the quality of life, this is now, to be honest, affecting all the sectors, but it's getting more and more important, particularly in youngsters. We saw that, you know, with in the US, but also in Europe, many people that are quitting their jobs because they are looking for, you know, better living conditions, and the sector is possibly offering this combination in a more, I would say, probably innovative way. So we are seeing more projects that are being developed outside city centers and more in peripheral areas. But this is honestly not yet mainstream. So this is something that should, yeah, we should pay more attention probably, and looking at the infrastructure issue as well.
Okay, thank you, Alessandra. And then I think that we have three questions for Christina. The first is mine. What were the services most requested by with the voucher? And then there are two questions for you in the chat. You said before that 75% of companies achieved success thanks to the services offered. What went wrong for the remaining 25%? And then another question from Luca. Do you have other example of services requested by business to the creative sector via the voucher? These are the three questions for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I will answer, of course, first yours. You said what were the mostly requested services, right? Something that we saw was that most of the companies were asking for support in the end of an innovation process. So they were maybe working on a product that looked ugly, or they were doing something like it was something they had already almost finished, and in the end, to make it look nicer, they wanted to have some kind of designer, for example. This is what we saw most of the time. And actually, this is something that we criticized, that was criticized about the voucher, and something that an element that we saw, okay, we have to make also companies aware that the support of creative service providers is not only beneficial in the end of an innovation process, but they should be involved already in the beginning, because maybe there are other functions they could add in the product that they don't even think of, because they are not designers themselves. So we actually, after that, developed another funding program that I will not speak about now, but this is something that we saw, that yeah, most of them were in the end of an innovation process and only for the final things. How can we make it look nicer? And what about the other 25% who were not so satisfied with the cooperation? We did not do a matchmaking with the company. So some of the company, they could choose by themselves the creative service provider they wanted to work with. And some of them chose not so well, or didn't know where to choose because they didn't know many good ones. So they were sometimes not so satisfied with that. We tried to change that in the after the years. In the beginning, they did not have to tell us at all who they're going to work together with, who is the creative service provider. They only had to tell us after the cooperation has ended. They have to describe who it was and what they did. And then we changed that. They already had in the application phase, they had to tell us who is the creative service provider and why is this one a good one. If we saw that this is not such a good creative service provider, we declined the voucher. So this is something that we saw. Some have problems with finding good creative service providers, and we tried to raise the number of 25%. This evaluation has been made quite in the beginning after 2 rounds of vouchers. So this is why the number was still quite high. I hope it was lower after that, but we did not do the evaluation every year. And the third question: do you have other examples of services requested by businesses to creative service. Can you explain a bit more what you mean with services?
Luca, Basso?
Maybe you mean not only for the marketing at the end, or what do you mean?
Well, actually, if you just could give us some few more examples. We've seen the track, and that was about probably the marketing part. And is there something else that you would remember as interesting or funny or whatever?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the track was actually not so much about the marketing. It was in the end, it was more about changing the structure of the truck itself, so that it's more has a lower emission and that they need less gas to drive. So it's more economic. Yeah, makes economical sense. Many wanted to have a product look nicer. Some wanted some kind of marketing support. And marketing, creatives are always better at marketing than often those very old, wider economy companies. Often they are not that creative, and they are not so good at marketing. So this is something. Were also elements that they were asking for a lot. Funny projects. We had quite many funny projects. I mean, there were also some economic. Well, often sometimes companies have different products, and they want them to look similar to each other, so that it looks like all the products that come from this company really are from this company. So often they were asking for design support. Yeah, more or less.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much. Gabriele, I have a question for you. You said before there is the platform, there is this tool, but we know that our enterprises are above all micro enterprises, and maybe they are not able to have access to this type of contribution measure. What is your experience? Are micro cultural creative enterprises able to have access to this fund, or just only the great institution, cultural institutions, so on?
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks for the question, Cynthia. It's one of those topics that I see recurring topics in our advocacy activities vis-a-vis the EU institutions, like really the need to bear in mind the structure of the cultural and creative sectors in Europe, and who are the cultural players that at the end of the day and ultimately they should reach out to, going beyond the well-known big cultural institutions. For the first time, I mean, I'm speaking again of the smallest of the EU programs, which is Creative Europe, but at the same time, it is the one dedicated to the cultural and creative sectors. For the first time, I mean, the new Creative Europe, so the one that started last year in 2021 until 2027, has a dedicated, as three, let's say, in the cooperation projects, as three different types of projects, from the large scale to the small scale, going through a medium scale project. So the idea of making also the red tape, the bureaucracy of the project easier and more accessible to the cultural practitioners, and giving the possibility of also putting in place smaller projects, smaller scale projects, has been heard at the Commission. I mean, this is a topic that whenever we speak about, the Commission tells us, yes, we know what is your pitch here, but we believe, I mean, we need to continuously insist on that from an advocacy point of view. What we have seen with the recovery plans, that again, I repeat, is the major public spending, I mean, dedicated public spending the European Union has ever done. I mean, with joint borrowing, with common debt that the European Union has ever done in its history. So with that program, we see that while there are some interventions relevant for culture, those are targeting the usual suspects, or even are somehow something I didn't say before, but are sort of hiding behind the cultural envelope, some interventions that have an indirect contribution to culture, but not directly contributes to those people doing culture, making culture in Europe. And speaking of the energy efficiency, for example, interventions in many cultural venues, of course, I mean, when I speak with our members that represent museums, of course, that is urgently needed. And none of us would ever say that we should not prioritize that. We are clear we should prioritize that, but there is a huge mission that is called the Green Deal to tackle that, including whatever venue, including cultural venues. The budget for culture, especially of a program that is called Next Generation EU, should be focused on the people. And then at the end of the day, I know that, of course, the interventions, the energy efficiency interventions have ultimately a positive effect on those working there. I'm not blind to that, but really we need to bring the independent artists and the small agents, the micro-organizations to the around the table, not to have them on the menu. In that sense, if I can say something also from my direct experience, what I see very much needed in terms also of capacity building for knowing what are the tools available, what are the schemes available, how to go through, who to ask for advice on, is it appropriate for my organization to participate in a Horizon Europe project, or rather am I more fit for an Erasmus Plus action? In all that, what I'm seeing every day is that what happens in a network, I mean, the good thing of being part of a network is indeed the networking. We have been confronted with 2 years where networking had only been possible online. Luckily now we are again activating in-person occasions, but I must say that also the online, I mean, we have had the experience in the last year of having a monthly lunchtime meeting, 1 hour short, right to the point, with our members on specific topic, on specific projects. From those projects, we know that other projects have come to existence. So indeed, what I especially to independent cultural professionals and small and micro organizations, I would underline the importance of not being an island, but really being more of an archipelago, more like in constant exchange with the peers and with the others, and taking into also consideration networking opportunities, and going also for commissions call, participating in commissions calls. Of course, probably the first or even the second time you will not be successful, but you will start getting acquainted with the language of the project of the European Union, and also get in contact with other with other organizations with which you can collaborate. We have a member that is Artifarti. They are based in France, and indeed they work with small and micro organizations and independent artistic scene in France. And all what I said is very much what I normally hear for them. So I mean, those challenges are really common to everybody across Europe, and the urgency, also the advocacy urgency to keep the focus on not the big players, because at some point those will be there in any case, hopefully, but on the small actors is crucial. So thanks for the question, Cinzia.
Well, I think, thank you very much, Gabriele. I think that the time is over, so it is time to close the workshop, but not before to remember to join us on the Facebook page of the project ChIMERA Plus, and review the videos of the 4 workshops. It looks like we have covered the main items on the agenda and achieved the goal of the project to strengthen the capacity building of our stakeholders. So let me thank all the speakers, all the partners, Elena Mengotti, our project leader, and all the participants. That's all for today. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.